The video you are about to watch is from an old woodworking magazine that I published during the years of 2003 to approximately 2006. This was a very unique magazine. It was purely video content and it was distributed on DVDs. The magazine ran for approximately 3.5 years, and then due to financial concerns, we simply had to terminate the magazine. We moved on to other things over the last roughly 15 years. However, there has been a request to resurrect this content, so I've gone through the trouble to get the equipment, the products, everything I needed in order to bring this content back to life to share with everyone. Here on this YouTube channel, we'll be putting up approximately 100 to 120 of the original stories that appeared in that magazine. The magazine was called Woodworking at Home Magazine, and it was truly one of a kind in the world. I really hope you enjoy these videos, and please tell your friends about them.
Well, as you can see, it's starting to look like a Mitersaw stand. Now our next task is to work on the drawers. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this is modular storage, so you can configure your drawers the way you want based on that 1 3/4 inch spacing. Now I've gone through, got my drawers set up the way I want to. Now we can start cutting the material and get ready to assemble the drawers. We'll get started on the drawers by ripping all of the sides, fronts, and backs to their proper width. The compound miter saw makes quick work of cutting off all the drawer sides, fronts, and backs. Using a stop block ensures accuracy and repeatability. Now, depending on the size of your fingers, you may want to adjust the size of the hole. Now, we're set up for a 7/8 inch diameter hole, and that works out fine for my fingers. Now, I will mention that all of the holes should be located the same distance up from our bottom of the drawer, and that will give us the maximum strength between the front of the drawer and the bottom. If we got a real tall drawer and you're pulling up here, you rack the drawer more. So by keeping the holes down near the bottom, we can pull where it's fastened against the bottom. Now let's head over to the drill press and we'll show you how to drill these holes. I laid out the location where I wanted my hole to be, and that's of course center to left to right, and then on your single height drawer, it's in the center vertically. Made a layout mark, set my drill so that it's down on top of that layout mark, and then I attached a backer board so that when I drill through, I don't get terrible tear out, and set a couple of stop blocks so that I can drill all the pieces, regardless of the size of the drawer, simply by putting it in and drilling the hole. While I have access to both sides of the hole, I'm just going to take some sandpaper and break that sharp edge. And that way I won't be getting slivers in my finger when I go to open or close the drawers. The front and back of the drawers will be held to the side with a simple butt joint. To reinforce that butt joint, I'm going to be using pocket hole screws, and I'll drill those on the inside surfaces of the drawer sides, one hole at each end. Now if you're making taller drawers, say a double height or triple height drawer, you should use one screw per segment of height. So if you've got a double height drawer, you should use 2 pocket hole screws. Next, we can assemble the sides to the fronts and backs. I'll start out by applying a little bit of glue on that joint. And then I've clamped a board in my bench vise that helps me to line things up a little bit. Install the screw and tighten it up. Now we can attach the box frame to the bottom of the drawer. I'll be gluing it in place and using brads as well as screws. Now our first step is to get the glue on and then get the box centered up very carefully on the drawer bottom. Now to help with that, I've drawn some layout lines in from each edge of the drawer bottom showing me where I want to position my sides. The front and back are simply flush. And then I'll clamp the box in place at the front and back. Then we can flip it over and tack it in place with some brads. Now, to minimize the chance of having the nails blow out on either side, I've taken the time to lay out the center position of our drawer sides and the front, and I'll try to nail as close as I can along that line. I'm using 3/4 inch brads for this application. Now we want to reinforce the bottom of the drawer. Now up near the finger pull, we want to put in 2 screws on either side of the hole, and that will help keep the plywood front from pulling away from the bottom. Out near the back of the drawer, we want to install a couple of screws there. And those will help keep the hardboard bottom from pulling away from the sides as we pull the drawer out and allow it to hang there. Now on the thicker drawers, the ones that are more than 1 drawer height tall, apply 2 screws back there. Bring them in about 1 inch from the back, and then the second one about 4 inches in from the back. Now I will pre-drill these because I don't want that plywood to split. Now as you'll notice, my drill also countersunk the hole, and I'm using number 8 by 1 inch long screws. When you drive them in, make sure they're flush with the bottom of the drawer. And that should do it for the drawers. Now our next step is to start working on the fold down work supports that come off of each side of our Mitersaw cabinet. One area that you may want to customize on your Mitersaw cabinet is the width of our fold down work support. Now this is a 12-inch compound miter saw, and it has a cut off width capacity of about 8 inches. Now if you've got a sliding miter saw, you may want to allow for a little bit wider of a fold down support. Now the next thing you also want to pay attention to at this point is the positioning of where we mount that fold down support. When you install your saw inside the opening here, make sure that you can pivot the saw around and have full access to all of the controls and that there aren't any interference points. So establish the position front to back and perhaps even left to right of your saw before going on to your fold down wings. Now I can go ahead and get started on my work supports, and I'll start out by ripping the material and then cross-cutting it off to its proper length. This groove that I just machined in the front face of our fence is 3/4 of an inch wide, 1/4 inch deep, and 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom. And that will receive the actual flat portion of our work support. Along the front edge of the work support, we want to attach this 1.5 inch wide by 3/4 inch thick hardwood strip. Now to attach that, I'll be using 5 number 20 biscuits evenly spaced. Now we can go ahead and assemble the pieces that make up the work supports. All it's going to require is glue, biscuits, and clamps. Now the fence should be about 1 1/16 shorter, so make sure that you line up the one end perfectly flush. And that should do it. We'll let it sit in the clamps for about a half hour or so, then we can move on. And be sure that you make a left and a right work support. The ends are opposite where we have that setback between the work support surface and that fence. After placing the saw on the cart, I've carefully positioned it where I want it. I then transferred the fence location out to the outboard edges. Now the saw is loose at this time, and what I'll end up doing is aligning the saw to the fences on the wings later on. But that reference line gives me a starting point. Now I want to come a 1/4 inch forward and make a line coming down the side of the case. And what that's going to do is give us a place or a reference on where to mount our cleat that the hinges mount onto. Now I also made a mark 1 1/16 inch down. Now using 2-inch number 8 screws, I'm going to fasten this cleat onto the side of the cabinet. Now I also took the time to lay out the location where the hinges are going to be so that the screws don't hit each other. That is to say that the screws that fasten this to the case and the screws that fasten the hinges to the cleat don't interfere with each other. After carefully lining it up and clamping it in place, we can drive the screws home. What I'm doing is sanding away a bevel in this area so that the barrel on the hinge fits in this area. Now this isn't a flat mount hinge, so we do have to account for that barrel a little bit. So I'll have to grind some material away here to provide clearance, as well as on the bottom surface of our outboard supports. Now our next step is to mount up the hinges. And this step is very critical as we want our outboard supports to be level with the top of our cabinet. So to help with that, I've come up with a very simple little jig. It's made out of the same 3/4 inch birch plywood that the outboard supports are made out of. And I just nailed a couple pieces together to make a little jig for setting the height of our hinge. Now I do want to, of course, make sure that I'm taking into account the clearance for that barrel portion of the hinge, so I'll have to pull it away from the cabinet to clear that. And what I want to do is position this hinge so that it's nice and flush up against that jig. Now with the hinge carefully positioned there, what I want to do is hold everything in place and carefully mark the locations where I want to drill the holes. Now the hinge should be a 1/2 inch in from each end of that cleat. Go ahead and pre-drill the holes before installing the screws. To help with installing our first shelf, what we want to do is start out by ripping a strip of wood that's 1 1/4 inch wide and about 20 inches long. And that's going to serve as a spacer to keep our work support away from the side of the cabinet. Next, I've taken another scrap of wood and clamped that on the inside face of the fence. And that's to help me line up with the layout mark that's on top of the cabinet saw stand that shows me where the fence location is of the saw. I've also got a work support set up to help support the outboard end. Next, I'll place a clamp across the length of the outboard support. I'm going to push up on the hinges and feel them so that they're flat on the under surface of our work support. And then I'll snug up this clamp. Now we're ready to tighten up those screws. Now on the second side, what you want to do is make sure that you're in straight alignment with the other wing. The best way to do that is to take a very long straight board, clamp it against the wing that we've already mounted, and then line up the other wing to match up with that board. Take your time, get all the alignment just right. Now that I'm all set there, I'll go ahead and install these screws. I should also point out that this clamp is clamped against the hinge and the top of our work support, and that helps stabilize this end during that alignment procedure. The work support braces start out as 3/4 inch birch plywood. Rip some strips to 4 inches wide. Then we'll cut off the 4 cleats and then the 2 braces here at the compound miter saw. And the cuts that we need to make are at 45 degrees. Installing the brace starts out by installing our cleat on the side of the cabinet. And you'll have to lay out the location of that, centering our support left to right so that it's centered underneath that work support. And then you'll draw your layout line coming down, and that lines up with the top edge of the bevel where it meets up with the cabinet. Now I'll tack it in place with a couple of brads and then use 3 screws to hold it in place permanently. And I'll be using number 8 by 1.5 inch long wood screws. Using a long straight edge that's resting on the top of the cabinet, we want to make sure that our shelf or our work support is also level to that board. So adjust your height up and down using a work support to help hold it in place. And now to finish installing the brace. Start out by taking the brace, placing that on our lower cleat, and then try to hold your brace so that it's square to the cabinet side. Take the other cleat, hold that to the bottom surface of your work support, keeping everything in alignment, and then tack it in place with a couple of brads. Now if you don't have a brad nailer, you can use double-sided tape or even a clamp. And then using 1.25 inch screws, we can hold it in place permanently. And that completes the construction of the major portion of our Mitersaw cabinet. Next up is to start doing some finishing. I think I'll stain it a medium brown and maybe apply a couple of coats of a water-based polyurethane. Well, as you can see, I went for a two-tone stain job. Went with a dark cherry brown on the drawer fronts and a country pine on the rest of the birch components. I then topped it off with 3 coats of a water-based polyurethane. Now, one thing you'll want to pay attention to with water-based polyurethane products, if you apply too many coats too quickly, the moisture can be trapped in the layers of the polyurethane and you'll get that blue haze. It won't go away. In fact, I've got one project that I built about 10 or 12, maybe even 15 years ago, and it still has that blue haze in it. So you do have to watch for that. But here's a tip for you. Take your moisture meter, measure the moisture content of your surface before starting the finishing process. Take a measurement, then apply your stain or your top coat. Let it dry until the moisture content goes back to its original value. Then apply your next coat and your next coat. And that way you won't have that blue haze in there and you won't have any moisture trapped in the layers of your finish. Now, mounting up the saw, you'll have to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. But as you can see, this cart has a very generous width opening and depth opening. So it should accommodate the vast majority of miter saws available, including many of the sliding miter saws. Now, I did have to shim my saw up a little bit, so I just ripped some thin strips of hardwood, placed those underneath the rubber feet, and then used the recommended mounting screws, tightened everything down. I also used a long board to make sure that I'm getting everything level and so that my fences line up. Now, I will admit right now that one of the problems with miter saw stands like this, the wood fences will probably never stay permanently in alignment with the actual saw's fence. So what you want to do is make sure that your saw's fence and table surface are either perfectly even or at least a little bit proud of your wooden surfaces. Because for the most precision on all your cuts, you want to make sure that you're referencing the saw's machined surfaces and not your surfaces out here on your extension wings or even up here at the top of the cart. Now, as you probably noticed, we changed miter saws. We replaced our old one with this new twin laser Delta model. Now, I'm really expecting this laser system to come in handy on certain operations. Now, on my old saw, I would have to sight down the edge of the blade or look through the guard or even lift the guard up out of the way to see inside there. Now, this saw with that laser, which is adjustable, can be positioned perfectly on either side of your cut line. So it's very easy to line up to make those one-off type cuts. Another thing I noticed about this saw right away with my first few cuts is it's quieter and the electronic braking system seems to function much better. While I am excited about the new saw, one of the really nice features of this new cart is organization and storage. In the lower large drawers, I've got my big cast iron tenon jig, our smaller project tenon jig that we made in a few issues ago. I've got storage for parts for my push blocks, all my grippers, which is an ever-growing collection because I'm finding more and more uses for those. We've got the old-fashioned push sticks, which aren't getting much use these days. Miter gauges, feather boards, throat plates, saw blades, and more saw blades, all neatly stored, easily organized. Even have plenty of room for some bandsaw blades in this project. So as you can see, all around this project turned out real well. It's a great addition to our shop here, and I'm sure it'll be a great addition to your shop. Now you will have to do some small modifications to accommodate your saw, but all around this cabinet should work with most of the miter saws that are available to you. I'm Chris DeHut for Woodworking at Home magazine. Thanks for watching.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you truly enjoyed it, please help us share this information with the rest of the communities. Please hit the subscribe button, give us a big thumbs up, and be sure to tell your friends about this channel. Thanks again for watching.